This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome into BTOWN, Rhode Island's podcast of record. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you every Tuesday and Friday and anytime on social media at Bill Bartholomew on Twitter and Instagram and inside the Bartholomew Town Podcast Facebook group. Today, one of my favorite creators here inside the Rhode Island market who has really a national footprint through a variety of projects, the great G. Wayne Miller of the Providence Journal. Today we focus in on his latest fiction book, Blue Hill, which is outstanding. I highly recommend everyone pick up a copy of that or an audiobook, however you prefer to read these days. And we talk about COVID-19, frankly, and covering that and all that's gone into that story and that saga. It's a fascinating discussion with someone who's been right there on the front lines. He's been at many of the press conferences that you hear every now Thursday at 1 p.m., on the Bartholomew Town Podcast Facebook group that I'm in the room for, going over the latest details from the Rhode Island Department of Health and the governor, previously Governor Raimondo, and now Governor Dan McKee. And I think what's most interesting about talking with Wayne Miller is that variety of outputs that he has, yet he's found a way to converge all of that into his own personality, his own unique voice, his own brand, if you will. And this is somebody who has the pen, the abilities, the chops of, I guess, the old guard journalism that we're used to, but also has the understanding of how to reach people in a variety of different ways. Again, through fiction writing, through the newspaper, through podcasting, through radio, through television. So one of my favorites, someone who I can certainly relate to myself as a singer, songwriter, and musician for so many years, and then making that turn several years back to become a podcaster, journalist, and now radio and television. So for me personally, G. Wayne Miller, it really means a lot to have him on the show because he's somebody who does what I've been trying to build. You know, he reminds me of Jim Hummel, who has done a tremendous job, again, through radio, print, television, digital, delivering storytelling, journalism, analysis, the whole deal. And this is Wayne's second appearance on the show. He was on, I think it was 2019, back when we were still, of course, in person here at the Loft in Providence. Man, those were the days, you know, just meeting the guests outside, bringing them up in here into the artist loft here in South Providence, and just that experience. You got to wonder when that's going to come back, you know, and in general, of course, all of our in-person events, large and small. You know, for me, I've been really of the mind that let's play it as safely as possible. We've been doing all the interviews via Zoom, of course, last year, since like mid-March, that was the case. And honestly, I don't see any reason to push the limits or anything like that and shift back to in-person for a while, you know what I mean? And I know some of you have asked, you know, you've sent me an email or you've asked me in person, whatever. When do you think you're going to go back to in-person interviews? And we'll see. You know, time will tell. We're playing this day by day, and I think that's one of the highlights or takeaways, if you will, from this conversation that we have today is that COVID-19, it's a day-by-day situation. If you'd like to support the independent journalism, analysis, entertainment, and opinion that we deliver here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast, there's a few ways you may do so. Go ahead and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening right now. And if you want to go a step further, become a BTOWN insider by heading to patreon.com/BartholomewTown or just click the heart, you know, the little support link wherever you're listening right now. Okay, let's get to it. G. Wayne Miller back in BTOWN here for Season 4. You know, I love Blue Hill. I really enjoyed it. And I think the thing about it that for me really stuck out was the time frame. It's a period that I really look at as this transition point in humanity that sometimes I think about, well, I'm glad I'm a millennial and not someone in Generation Z because I really had a chance to understand the analog world and that crossover to the digital world. And there's so much of that sort of is a flavor, if you will. It's certainly not the book itself, but there's a flavor of that. I also think it's interesting that, you know, that your own timeline with creating this book, which I'll link to if you're wherever you're listening right now. I'll link to Amazon and so the listeners can go check it out for themselves. But kind of paint a picture of the creative process behind Blue Hill and how you arrived at this, you know, this story that is very specific but also very relatable.
So I've always had sort of two writing passions. One still is my journalism, but that was sort of the day job, is the day job. Along with that, I have written fiction for many, many years. really going back, starting in high school and even earlier. So during the 1990s, as the internet world was beginning to evolve, I was working on a number of projects. I had my first novel published in 1989. That was a horror novel, and I had some other stuff published. But I was fascinated with this transition period. When I started Notes on Blue Hill, we were in the dial-up age. And I remember this very distinctly. There would be times during the day where you'd go try to sign on. I was on AOL at the time.
Oh, yeah. You've got mail.
Some people are still on AOL.
I don't know how, but yeah, somehow you're right. You do see it every now and then, and it's shocking.
Yeah, well, I guess because people started there and they don't want to go through the hassle of transforming or transitioning to a new platform. Anyway, so I was actually writing coming of age at the time. I was embedded at Burrillville High School writing that book. And so this was in 1992, 1993, and I was beginning to make notes on this book, and I sort of had the concept. But I would come home every day from school, Burrillville High School, and I would try to log on, and you'd get that horrible sound that we all remember, many of us remember, of a certain age, beep, 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 and it wouldn't go through, and it was maddening, it was frustrating. But eventually you could get through, and there were chat rooms at the time. There were, really precursors to what we have in terms of social media today. And the whole thing fascinated me. I've always been interested in technology, really going back to when I was a kid. So I began to make notes about this, what was happening, why, my experiences. And along with that, of course, was the germ of the book, the narrative itself, which is about a character in 1997 who is on the cutting edge of technology at the time. He belongs to a very successful firm that is making games, online games, online games, and they're toying with the idea of doing virtual reality, which, believe it or not, I'm saying that to people who are younger, was experimental, but there in some fashion in the late 1990s. So this character is intrigued by this. He wants to have the breakthrough technology and the breakthrough platform that will make him a lot of money. And in doing this, he encounters a woman living in New York, he thinks, who agrees to be a character in a virtual reality game. So he becomes involved with her, thinking that she will simply be a model for his game. And it turns out to be a whole lot more than that. She's not who she says she is. He gets caught up in a scheme where he is believed to have murdered this woman when in fact she's still alive. And as I said, wasn't anything she purported to be. So he goes on the run, basically. He's now one of America's most wanted. And when I say he goes on the run, he both obviously leaves New York. He goes back to his home in Massachusetts. He has a wife and a young son. He says goodbye to them. I've got business I have to do. And he heads toward Maine, where he grew up. And on the way, he stops at Fenway Park, which was a very instrumental place in his childhood. He then makes it all the way to Blue Hill, Maine, where he grew up. And his father is still alive, but he and his father have been not had a relationship really much at all. His father was an Episcopal priest, and this man as a kid was sort of the rebel, and he finds his first love, or reconnects with his first love, and there's a mystery and a secret there. So all of this was wrapped together, and I wrote a lot of it in the mid to late 90s, finished most of it in 1997, and then it goes in the trunk. And I can't tell you, Bill, how many novels I have in the trunk. A couple are finished. Maybe we'll see them someday.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't. Plus ideas, half-finished things. Writers who are obsessive like me will certainly relate to that. So in looking at what I had in the trunk a couple of years ago, this popped up, and it was like I read it again, and part of it, the writing was a little bit stylistically not what I wanted, so I changed a little bit of that. But basically, the spine of the book is what I had written in 1997, And I liked it, and not because I'd written it, because it brought me back to 1997 and the themes of mystery, of deceit, of lost love, first love, of what really matters in life, and truth, which of course is really one of the overarching themes of this. What is really true?
Yeah.
What is really happening? What did really happening? And of course, in this era, that you can't find a better theme. So I had not really written the ending to this book. And so I spent a lot of time trying to come up with the ending. And I finally settled on something I liked. And I went to one of my publishers, Crossroad Press, great people. They've published a lot of my work. And I said to David Wilson, take a look. He's the publisher. Take a look. What do you think? And he liked it. He liked it a lot. So we made it. We made it a book. And so it's a paperback. It's an audio book. Great, great narrator, young man by the name of Justin Karamoto, who he actually was in Berlin when he narrated this. I mean,
extra element right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it's a Kindle and a Nook and whatever. So I'm pleased with it. It's not a bestseller, not going to be a bestseller, but it's a good read. And the feedback I've gotten from people who have read it is, I think, pretty similar to yours. They like the themes, the narrative, the characters, and all that, but they're particularly struck with that period in our evolution of the internet. And again, Gen Z, didn't live through this. They were like
missed out.
Yeah, they missed out with the frustration, but also it was amazing. I remember, and I guess we're sort of digressing here, but it's pertinent. I remember the first time that I signed on to AOL, and they had a weather map. I remember this so distinctly. I was living in Pasco, where I wrote this book, the first part of it anyway, most of it anyway. And I remember being transfixed in my study, watching a weather map load. It was a static weather map, and it was through dial-up. It was, one of these, 64 kilobyte type deals. But I remember, I think it might have even been Christmas morning or Christmas around there, and an actual weather map. And I'm a weather geek. It actually materialized on my screen. Now, you could see weather maps, of course, on TV, but I had never seen anything like this. So that was the marvel and the mystery and the wonder of that time. And last word on this, I remember thinking, because there was a lot of discussion online and in print about, someday you might actually be able to stream a movie on this. Yeah. Of course, you can at 64 kilobytes, but here we are. Anyway.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And there's the theme of truth in there. Somehow or another, I stumbled upon. I used to watch wrestling when I was a little kid. It certainly hadn't. I think anything after 1995, I don't know anything about. But I somehow stumbled. I love the commentary. The commentators on there, and somehow I stumbled on this YouTube video a few years ago of Vince McMahon or actually Jesse Ventura, who what was he, governor of Michigan or Minnesota, and
I believe,
yeah, he was a wrestler, and on his first day becoming a wrestling commentator, he has this great anecdote where he sits down and looks over at Vince McMahon and says, how do I do this? Knowing that this is all false, and McMahon looks back at him and says, if you believe it, it's real. And that theme is in your book as well, because what's real, what's dream, what's reality, what's real, what's truth, what's not. It's all a matter of what's in front of you in that moment and how you convince yourself. That is what actual truth is in that moment. Even someone say, well, you're lying to yourself, but are you really? So it's this exercise in philosophy and psychology. I mean, we're going pretty deep here in the themes, but that plays itself out and it's resolved in your book as well. And I think that journey is a sidebar that is so interesting that you were able to paint that same sort of scenario. If you believe it, if it's real, even if it's a negative thing and it's causing you to run to Blue Hill.
Yeah. And of course, it's quite relevant in today's day and age with QAnon and so forth. Reconciliation, though, is a big theme in this book as well. Reconciliation with your past. Many of us, maybe all of us, tend to look back at the past and exaggerate. We romanticize the good things and we go really dark on the bad things. And, time changes your memory of that. Time changes your reality of that. And sometimes I think going back and seeing what was really there and processing it again and coming to terms and grips with it and being okay with it finally, eventually, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, it's an important process that a lot of people go through. I know from meditation that it's an important thing that I have done as well. So that theme is in there. The reconciliation with this character, his name is Mark Gray, with his father, to me is quite powerful. And I used a metaphor, an actual physical metaphor. So he's been, sort of out of touch with his father, bad relationship with his father. His father was an Episcopal priest. He was very active in the anti-Vietnam War movement. He was a very progressive person. And all this young man, Mark Gray, when he was a boy, wanted to do was play baseball. And then he gets beaned and he can't. Or Tony Caniglia gets beaned and his father takes him out of baseball. So he's held that, this grudge against his father all this time. Plus, he was embarrassed that dad, Blue Hill, Maine is a conservative part of Maine, that whole area. Parts of it are progressive, but basically that area is very conservative. And so he was embarrassed at his father, marching against the Vietnam War and all that. They've stayed in touch, but it has been, it's been a up and down relationship, rather. It's not been ideal. It has certainly haunted the father. And as the protagonist discovers, it's haunted him. So the end of the book, part of the end of the book, he returns to Blue Hill, Maine. He drops in on his father, who's living where he grew up. The mother has long since died. That happened when Mark Gray was a child too. He walks in, there's his father. A blizzard is coming, kind of what we're expecting here today. A nor'easter is coming. And the family before the mother died had a tradition of climbing Blue Hill. This is actually, of course, a Blue Hill in Maine. It's a hill. It's also a town. And they had a tradition of doing this annually. It was just what the family did. We're going to pack a picnic lunch, climb Blue Hill. There's a fire tower on top. You, young man, can climb up on that. A very nice family tradition. Of course, it all ends when the mother dies. The father, this aging man, this aging Episcopal priest, says, Mark, we're going to climb Blue Hill. And the protagonist goes, Dad, hello, there's a blizzard coming. And he says, I don't care. We're climbing Blue Hill. And they set off in the middle of a blizzard to get to the top. And it's, again, a physical metaphor for what both of them are doing. They're climbing a hill to get someplace where they had to go. And they're happy once they get there that they took that trip.
It's great stuff, and it just shows your chops as a writer. All right, folks, this is getting real. The time for talk is over. From iron workers to engineers, business owners to biology teachers, Rhode Islanders believe in the power of offshore wind. Together, we're cleaning the air and creating jobs right here at home. Our goal of 100% renewables by 2030 is in sight, and the future is bright with Rhode Island a real leader in America's emerging offshore wind industry. So what makes you a Revolution Wind believer? Join us at revolution-wind.com/it's real. That's revolution-wind.com/it's real. Let's go. For you as somebody who's a multimedia artist and journalist and storyteller, you write in the Providence Journal, you're covering COVID-19, major life and death stories. That's one mode. Your program Story in the Public Square is on Rhode Island PBS and is also distributed nationally in the top markets on Sirius XM radio. And then you have this robust career as a fiction writer. Is it something in your brain that allows you to flip between those different modes? While I think it's always so important to be yourself and be recognizable in any voice. And is that something that's sort of embedded in you? And is it something that allows for each of those areas to be better? Because you're not obsessive, you're not overdoing one particular zone. You're not totally focused on, let's say, covering, I mean, this is not what you do, but Providence City Hall for 25 years and living and breathing that. Does that make all of your work better?
I would say yes. In some regards, I have a short attention span. When I have to concentrate on something, I can, but at some point I want a break from it. Whether it's writing COVID stories, which I and my colleagues have been doing now literally for a year. Mm-hmm. At some point you want to break from that. Now and so I take that break, whether it's at the end of a day or in the middle of a day or whatever, first thing in the morning. That break can be lunch, it can be just getting away from a screen, and it can also be writing something else, some other genre. I am drawn to fiction because fiction, unlike journalism, you can essentially make everything up. You can't make up, you can't make Blue Hill in Connecticut, right. That type of thing. But in terms of characters, in terms of emotions, in terms of dialogue, in terms of the scenarios, and when you get into science fiction and horror, which I write, in terms of anything, you can make it up. And I love that. There's a great freedom and relief and satisfaction in being able to do that. And if you go down a certain path with a character and then you go, oh, you know what? That doesn't make sense. Mark Gray wouldn't have done that. You can go back to what you wrote earlier and change that. So I like that. And I will say too, I started writing fiction very aggressively when my children were very young. They're now grown. One is almost 40, believe it or not. One is in her mid-30s, and my son is living in Japan in a Buddhist temple, and he's in his 20s. So they're all grown and gone and doing well in the world. But when they were kids, I wanted to spend time with them. Obviously, when they get up, get them off to school, have breakfast, do lunch, get their lunches. And then when they came home, also, spend time with them. And I was working at the Journal at the time and actually, in the newsroom. So I got into the habit of getting up very, very early, which I still do. If I'm not up by 5, it's, I'm being a sort of a sluggard. And that's just been wired into my brain, literally for 4 decades now. So I get up and I don't do as much fiction writing in the morning now as I used to, because this COVID coverage has really been all consuming and rightly so. I mean, I think we at the Journal and you and other people in the media have been doing this as a great public service. And, thanks for all you've done. And thanks to all of my colleagues, in broadcast media and other print outlets. So I do less of it, but long way of saying my good time for fiction writing has always been early in the morning. And then I make notes during the day. Writers have the writers I know, like Dan Barry, the New York Times, and mm-hmm. The sort of high-ranking, high-caliber people that I know very well, Chris Chivers. Their brains are always on 2, 3, 4 tracks. I don't know how else to explain it. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe some in our audience can too. It's both a blessing and a curse, by the way, I will say, because sometimes when you should be listening to someone in a conversation, your brain is like, what did Mark Gray do when he got to the top of Blue Hill? And the snow is even worse, not a good thing. But
yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I've forced myself to find activities. I rediscovered golf. I'm not Mr. Country Club here. I certainly am not out there dressed like, whoever, Jack Nicholson. But, I rediscovered golf with my old beat up clubs. Now I'm playing disc golf. And it's important for me to get out in the woods, but also have some kind of activity that requires like 3 or 4 different things that aren't related to podcasting, journalism, TV, radio, songwriting, to get that out of mind for at least an hour or 2 once a week, because otherwise, exactly, it's a 3 or 4 track thing and it becomes overwhelming. It really does.
Oh, you absolutely. You have to clear your head. Again, I meditate for a few minutes every day, and I find that really, really useful. I started with Headspace, but I've since discovered Calm with Tamara Levitt, which I think is just fantastic.
Great app. Yeah,
Oh,
great
it's
stuff.
it's a great app. And we tried to get her on our show, and she was too busy, didn't want to come on. So I do that. I walk as much as I can. My wife and I take our dog and go to the beach when we can, walk the beach or the woods or whatever. So it's so important. And sometimes recently, when it's been really cold and you can't really, do much, certainly don't want to spend time outside of the beach. I just get in my car and drive for half an hour, just around Warwick or, wherever, and just look at things, absorb the world, and get out of your head. Shut the 8-track off, shut the 6-track off. You just described it quite correctly and almost poetically, actually.
Oh, look out.
Look out.
So going to COVID, and look, you've been in plenty of those briefings that outgoing Governor Raimondo, and by the time this airs, likely will be the Commerce Secretary, Governor Raimondo. It's only a matter of a few days, it seems, but
yeah,
it's been this experience on my end where you're dealing with this massive story that has so many implications, so many different components. At the end of the day, very few people really know what's going on. You have a podcast now that goes inside expertise on a regular basis through USA Today Network. And I felt like inside the governor's press conferences with the Department of Health or whoever else they would bring out and have on the stage, whether it was General Callahan at times or more recently, Stefan Pryor, Commerce Secretary, nobody really knew exactly what was going on. And it was kind of just always, we've got to take the information we have on the ground today and make it work as well as we can, in knowing that somebody is going to be damaged by what we're about to say. Did you get the sense that they did the best they could? Because we hear people saying, oh man, this is a conspiracy against small businesses, or, now this is a conspiracy against restaurant workers because the restaurants are staying open later. It doesn't seem like anybody's satisfied, but isn't that the nature of the beast?
It absolutely is the nature of the beast. Bear in mind that it was 1 year ago to the day today, February 1st, that the first COVID case in Rhode Island was publicly revealed.
Yeah.
Prior to that, we'd been reading about this virus that emerged in Wuhan, China, and was starting to spread around the world. There were a couple of cases in Washington State and a few other places in the U.S. It was all brand new in every sense of the word. It was a brand new virus. Science had not even begun to study it, or they had just begun to study it. So that was brand new. The response was all brand new. We were thrown this, in sort of a cosmic sense, this tsunami of information, of questions, of mystery, of horror, emerging horror, sickness, and death. And it came, I actually wrote the first, I think this may have been the first story anywhere in this market, but for the Journal, I wrote the first story that mentioned COVID in January of 2020. By the beginning of March, we were all writing daily. And so I think the Department of Health, I think the governor, I think all of the people involved here were dealing with something that was changing daily. And there was no blueprint for this. There was no best practices. There was no, we saw this, and so we'll just pull out the plan, the blueprint again, and here we go. And plus, layered on all that was the fear that, the terrible depth of fear that people had, the losses of jobs, all of this. You can't imagine a worse crisis. I can't, unless you go to science fiction, Stephen King and The Stand. You just, and even that doesn't do justice to what we were all living through.
Yeah.
So knowing many of the participants at the health department and elsewhere, and who have tried to steer this thing, I think they've done the best they can. I'm really not critical. I do think, having said that the federal government and their response, which was incredibly awful and wrong and bad, which we saw then, which we're seeing now, which the new president has inherited, in terms of the vaccine rollout and all that. and that was a very complicating factor too. You know, let's take a parallel here to, and Biden has used this term, being at war. During World War II, the federal government didn't leave conscription, didn't leave arming people, didn't leave shipping troops across the Atlantic to the states. Hello, that's not how you don't fight a war that way.
Yeah.
So all of these were complicating factors, and yes, you know, we certainly can be critical of individual decisions that were made, and some of them were wrong, some of them were misguided, but I think the intent has always been good. I think people who were thrust into this situation on every level, from leadership in state government to the local level and to just individuals, I think mostly people have done the best they could in a situation, of course, which continues. And, you know, we haven't even talked about the mental health implications
Right.
of this, and we don't need to, but as you may or may not know, I've covered mental health at the Journal since almost when I arrived. So it's really been a passion of mine. And, you know, there's schools, there's kids. Wow. All I can say is wow. And thank God the vaccines are coming. They're not being rolled out the way they should be. And I think most of the blame there goes to the federal government, but hopefully that will change.
Yeah,
and if we do this in a year from now, I'll be in your studio.
Yeah, for real. I mean, that is definitely the litmus test. You know, we hear about COVID fatigue and usually think about people they're not going to wear their mask if they were wearing it before. Now they're going to go back to partying or whatever. I saw a post on Facebook this morning that somebody held at a bar in Chepachet. They had a live music event, and the photos, nobody's wearing masks, everybody's dancing, bands playing, this, that, and the other. This was last night. And, you know, we know about that, but what about COVID fatigue from the perspective of information distribution and gathering as far as within the journalism community? Is there a point where you believe that the story can't really be or be told in a way that is going to impact people, where everyone's going to be so numb to numbers that are horrible? Or, you know, what's the turn, I guess? What's the next turn that you're looking for?
I don't know what the next turn is.
Yeah.
I would say that of the professional outlets and people that I know, yourself included, we have done, again, the best job we can. Is there a question of overload? Of course there's a question of overload. You know, there are times, you know, I get up in the morning, in addition to writing, I will check out, you know, the local news, TV news, and then I'll go on CNN. But at a certain point, I have to shut it off because I get the facts that I need. I don't want any more. And I'm in the business of journalism, so I have to know that. The average person who is not in journalism, is not, you know, required, or whose job is not to report this and try to make sense of it, I totally see where people will get overwhelmed. And I also see where that can lead individuals to other sources of information, to other theories to explain what is happening, to frustration at the rules and whatever. But you mentioned masks at this bar. That's one I do not get why people do that. It has been abundantly clear. Every health expert, from Dr. Ashish Jha, you mentioned the podcast.
Yep. He's
the dean of the School of Public Health at Brown. Dr. Jha is a world-class pandemic expert. All of the other people at the health department, people at the federal level, have all said unanimously, there is no dispute here that masks reduce the risk of transmission and of contagion, getting it yourself. Why people can't do that? You know, we're not asking people to, you know, I'm making this up now, to put a deep diving helmet on your head and stay in your basement, right? Wear a mask. Nobody likes it. And by the way, if you want to, like, if you don't like wearing a mask, talk to people on the front lines in healthcare and other industries who wear them all the time. They don't like it either. They do it. You can do it. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox here, but it's something I do not get. I just don't get. Don't get.
Yeah, I can't wrap my head around it either. You know, there's it's very rare now that I'm in a store or in a situation that I see someone without a mask, but it does happen. And it's, I was in Newport, I think it must have been September or October. It was right when we had kind of a dip and there was a little bit of a calm for a moment, but I was in a grocery store and a person walking around with no mask. You saw the staff saying, "Hey, please put a mask on. This is dangerous." And just the, you just felt emanating from that person, this, this bully-like mentality of like saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to wear the mask. I mean, we see characters on Facebook that post, they spam my wall all the time. The healing church people and all these sort of wild characters that try to promote the idea that the mask is suppression. Never mind that it's neutral and it's just a choice to not wear it, but that wearing the mask makes you weak. And I don't get where it came from. It doesn't click in my head how that makes any sense to any person that is able to think for themselves.
I don't get it either. I mean, obviously it was politicized, and the last administration was a major factor in that. But so here's what I would say to people who sort of flaunt not wearing the mask. The bully element, as you mentioned. Find somebody who has lost a parent or a sibling or a dear friend to COVID and ask that person, should I wear a mask? And I guarantee you that 100 times out of 100, that person who has just buried mom or dad or grandmother and maybe couldn't even go to the funeral and said goodbye over, an iPhone in an intensive care unit at Rhode Island Hospital. Ask that person.
Yeah.
I get sort of emotional talking about this. I've covered healthcare for a long, long time. And, it's not hard to sort the truth from the nonsense in this. This especially is just such a simple thing. Here's why it helps. When you breathe out, the particles don't get out in any great quantity.
Yeah.
And another pet peeve I have is people who wear a mask but not over their nose. Hello. Sorry, you really touched on a sore point here.
Oh, same here. Believe me, it's just,
I
have no words for it.
I know. And then people like Anthony Fauci, he gets death threats for saying it's like, anyway, that's a whole separate discussion as to where we are in America today. We're in a strange place, but hopefully it's going to be an improving place.
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, that's where someone like you has the advantage of being able to dip in and out of journalism and fiction, and and have some measure of escape, because otherwise this would be, I can't imagine being like an embedded full-time healthcare reporter for the last year, dealing with only COVID and literally nothing else in your life. It really must be eating away. I mean, never mind frontline healthcare worker. I mean, that more than anything else, of course, but I'm saying from the perspective of covering it, it must really eat away at your soul when you see the kind of nonsense that of people not wearing masks or calling it a hoax and all that business.
It hurts the brain to even think about. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Now you've given me a headache.
Look out. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
No, last area was, what's up for you now? I mean, you're always on a tear of one sort or another. You've got Rhode Island PBS and nationwide on Sirius XM. You've got it's a weekly podcast with Dr. Ja, right? Or is it a bi-weekly?
Oh, it's a weekly.
It's weekly. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Every Tuesday at 9 we tape. And by the way, Story in the Public Square is also national on PBS.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow. I didn't know that. See, you learn something every day.
We're in 80 of the top 100. I've forgotten the numbers exactly, but we're in 24 of the top 25 markets for the show itself, not just the audio, but the actual show. So our flagship station is Rhode Island PBS, but we're everywhere. We're in New York City, we're in Boston, San Diego, and all points in between, large markets and small. I think we're on 300 and some stations. If it's important, I can get you the exact numbers. But yeah, we're a national show. We're, I think, the only national show produced here in Rhode Island.
Definitely. Yeah. Which is, I don't get why. Do you get a lot of feedback locally on that show, or is it more of a nationwide deal where your feedback comes from or your audience is?
We get both. We started this show 4 years ago, and this is actually something on my Facebook page. We've done 201 shows since we started. We went national 2.5 years ago. So we get feedback from everywhere, but we made a decision fairly early on. Jim Ludis and I, he's my co-host and co-executive producer. We're along with our crew at Rhode Island PBS, we're the show. And we made a decision early on that we wanted to get national level storytellers, whether they're filmmakers, still photographers, artists, journalists, authors, whatever. We deliberately aim for people that anywhere in this country will be interested in hearing about because of what they do and because of what they stand for or what they say. So we certainly have had many local guests, people from Brown who have national stature, but we're not a show that does, anything just specific to Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the themes are specific to, or can be specific to people in Rhode Island, but we aim for that sort of higher bar. And we've been very successful, and success breeds success. So we now reach out to people we never thought we would get, like Mo Rocca, just to give you an example. And since we have this track record, they go, yeah, sure. And also because we're taping virtually now and have been for almost a year, we can get people from all over the world. We don't have to fly them in, and so we get folks from California and in the film industry and so forth and so on. And we're lucky and blessed in that regard to we built this thing from the ground up. And when Jim and I started it, we had no idea, and we didn't know what we were doing either.
Yeah, well, that's always the case, right? With something like that, it's like, here we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Ready, fire, aim, as Donald Rumsfeld would say. But what's next for you? So, are you writing? Obviously, you must have something in the works, fiction wise.
Yeah, I'm working on a few things. I don't think I really want to talk about them.
Yeah, top secret here. Kind
of top secret. I got a couple of other things in the work, but I'm certainly working on 2 novels. Let's sort of just leave it at that.
Yep.
One of them is actually set again in Maine, and one is a contemporary look at America. And let's leave it there.
Yeah, quite a tease. We'll go out on that note right there, ladies and gentlemen. All over the place, locally, Providence Journal. Find the books on Amazon and, nationally, coast to coast on PBS Story in the Public Square. And, of course, on Sirius XM, and your podcast with Dr. Jah on the USA Today Network, also coast to coast.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Stay safe. Be well.
You too. Yeah, you as well. All right.
Great work.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, BTOWN.
I take you inside breaking news and the biggest stories of the day impacting Rhode Island on Instagram at Bartholomew Town, Twitter at Bill Bartholomew, and inside the Bartholomew Town podcast Facebook group.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.